Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode, we'll be talking all about using NFTs for good, and in particular, a new NFT project that aims to help prisoners pay back debt and restore justice to our criminal justice system with Abe Uccello, founder of Pris0n Art. Welcome, Abe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Diana, for having me.
Of course. So before we dive into Pris0n Art and everything you've been working on there, give listeners a little bit of a background into the world that you're coming from in the past before you got into Web3, which I think will provide a lot of context for why you're building Pris0n Art now.
Yeah, I've had an opportunity to live a lot of lives. So there's probably not enough time in this podcast to go through them all. But I was always in tech, usually enterprise technology, and always had a startup sort of in the hip pocket. I was always problem solving. And, one of those lives led me to actually be the director of the Florida Department of Corrections. Before crypto projects, I started in criminal justice reform in about 2014 and always working in policy and practice reforms. And that's kind of what led me to start working in the prison system. And then even afterwards, try to help individuals that are returning home find employment, meaningful employment.
Right. So because I know this about you, and I know that you don't like to brag about yourself, you were actually the director of the Florida Department of Corrections starting in 2014. So you were like really high up there. And I think if I remember correctly, you were, in charge of sort of managing like these like reentry processes for inmates, like rehab programs, all of these different things. So I just want listeners to understand that you were like really like integral in structuring the correctional system for all of Florida for a number of years.
Yeah, the opportunity that I was afforded to provide sort of that civic service was really profound, eye-opening in many ways. The system was already there. What I was trying to do is just inject some humanism into the system. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but now I do see it and understand it much more clearly, hindsight, is that it really requires, going in head first to try and make change happen. Luckily, a lot of the changes we implemented are still there today, which is really unheard of. So, there's a system of at least some care based on the data that follows you from point of incarceration afterwards. So my area of responsibility really, there's several directors that are running the largest state agency in the state of Florida. It's $2.5 billion budget, 16,000 plus employees, just to kind of put a perspective on how we're spending our tax dollars and where money's going in comparison. So it's larger than education. It's larger than the things that would probably prevent, incarceration. So we're spending a lot of money and time fighting a centuries-old system, penal system, that we've yet to change. So my area of responsibility was reentry, education, mental health and substance abuse treatment. And, this is for everyone that was incarcerated. At the time, it was about 105,000 that were incarcerated in the state of Florida. And then we had about 2.5 times that were out on supervision or probation.
Wow. Gotcha. So how did that lead you to learn about Web3 and then take us through that journey and then how you eventually got the idea for Pris0n Art?
Yeah, when I left the correctional system, I was really interested in still trying to provide services and bridge those gaps that I saw very clearly that I also knew would never be addressed with current budgetary processes. And so the first thing I thought of was I need to create something that generates some revenue so that I can become my own endowment. And there was no real sort of structures for this because I saw sort of the infighting and sort of blood in the water with all the different entities that were fighting for the same grant dollars to try and fund their programs. And so I created a project where we were basically a subscription-based startup that was helping individuals find second chance employment. So it was like Indeed for convicted felons and people returning home from incarceration. And many of these folks had lots of skills prior to incarceration, And so I was trying to just help them put that back together. I was talking with a friend of mine and, kind of a best friend, and he vexed me by gifting me a wallet and then sent me some tokens. And then it was like, this light bulb illuminated in my head, about the programmability and the composability of tokens. And that's kind of where it began.
Okay, so for any listeners who have never heard of Pris0n Art before, can you describe what Pris0n Art is or what you guys strive to do?
Yeah, so one of the contributors to recidivism or repeat offenses is the fact that everyone comes home with legal financial obligations. And those legal financial obligations look like, court fees, legal fees, restitution payments, like to victims. So if you stole a diamond ring, you have to pay back that diamond ring. So all of these amounts of money, including child support and everything else, they, accumulate. Not only do they accumulate, but failure to pay imposes an interest. So these are interest-bearing accounts in many states as well. And then even though constitutionally it's unlawful to reincarcerate somebody for not payment of that debt, many local jurisdictions will issue civil penalties for failure to pay, in essence creating these debtor prisons, across the U.S. So people go back to jail, they go back to prison as a result of failure to miss even one payment. So upwards of 90% of states will reincarcerate you for failure to pay. So this is contributing to, at latest estimates, about 30% of the recidivism rate that we have today. So about, in essence, somewhere around 200,000 people to 250,000 people are going back to prisons and jails as a result of failure to pay those debts. And that's directly. Indirectly, failure to pay, just like any other kind of incentive, leads you to do unnatural things to try and make ends meet. And so the debt concept doesn't end just because you finished your sentence.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, something that I saw a lot when I was working with the public defenders was that a lot of the times it's, people, when they come out of prison, they're not set up for success financially. They don't have a wallet. They don't have any money. And so, like you said, it's you have failure to pay, but also like they're not set up for success in any way, like even provided housing or provided with a job so that they can earn money. So then it's like, great, like you let this prisoner out, but now what? Like, then what are they supposed to do? It's kind of like if you lock somebody away for 10 years and think about how much the world changes in 10 years, and then you release them and you're like, go live your life. They're like, I don't know. Like, I haven't lived my life in 10 years. Like, I don't even know how to do that. I don't have a family. I don't have anything. So they go back to what they have always known, which is, the streets, drug dealing, like whatever it is that landed them there in the first place. And that's how that endless cycle goes. So, I mean, this problem is like huge, like you said, and it's kind of like near and dear to my heart too, which is how we've originally connected and I heard about this project. But so tell people, like, how does Pris0n Art then strive to help solve some of these problems that you just highlighted?
Yeah, I think the problem and the problems that you mentioned are super significant. 1 in 13 people, so when you're at line for a cup of coffee or whatever the case is, 1 in 13 have some involvement in the justice system, some way, somehow. That's America's addiction to incarceration, right? So because of this sense of sort of infinite judgment and infinite punishment that we have, we've always contributed to this by separating the narrative, the story of an individual's life from, the transaction, the economic success of that individual, right? And so systemically, a lot of this problem comes from economic transactions, a history of economic transactions that are based on poverty, or they're based on greed, or they're based on debt. And so these concepts are integral to what put us in this position. Why wouldn't they be integral on how we climb out of that hole? And so what Pris0n Art does is we collect and curate art on behalf of the incarcerated, as well as those that were incarcerated, we mint an NFT, a non-fungible token of that artwork. And that artwork could be fine art. It could be a poem. It could be some writing. It could be a sketch that was sent to your child on their third birthday. Whatever the case is, something that tells a story, a narrative, and then we attach that narrative to the NFT as well. So even though there might be a piece of fine art, we can attach a video or a piece of poetry or whatever the case is that helps to really unravel that story for the viewers and people interested in that narrative. And then we sell that art, and then it is encoded to only programmatically pay the legal financial obligations and to pay some portion to a community partner, for instance, if they helped us collect the art, curate the piece, and are acting as an agent on behalf of the incarcerated or someone else. So in this instance, we're able to transparently show the splits on the proceeds. One of the beautiful things about this is you're not allowed to earn an income when you're incarcerated. Right? Yet we have billions of dollars of uncollected legal financial obligations that exist in this country. Municipalities need revenue, right? So everybody wins in this situation. The therapeutics for the incarcerated are phenomenal. When it comes down to actually what art does to help them identify differently with themselves and with the community at large. It's not earning an income, and they're actually paying back society that debt that is supposedly there for them when they return. And hopefully with enough sales of that artwork, they come home debt-free. And then they can focus on things that are really, really important as well, such as mental health, trauma, substance abuse treatment, skilling up so that they can get the right job, learning about technology. You mentioned somebody who was incarcerated for 10 years. I was talking with somebody who was released recently, and she was like, I cannot believe people just trust you to do your own checkout in Walmart. There's so many things that have changed in 10 years, right? So there's so much of a uphill battle when people come home. What we aim to do is just, again, programmatically, it's encoded in the smart contract to only pay those legal financial obligations and any partner that's there. 10% comes to a reserve or treasury for Pris0n Art, where we use that to fund new projects that are consistent with our mission of helping to remove this debt from people returning from prison. Oh, and then afterwards, just to add to that, is we attach the receipts of the payment to the artwork, where it eternally travels with that piece of artwork throughout its lifespan. So that forever that narrative is always told of economic restoration as well as that individual's restoration in society.
Wow. Maybe I missed this part, but so with secondary sales and onwards, like if this painting, for instance, gets sold 10 times, does the original creator of the artwork, the inmate, receive royalties from each additional sale?
Yeah, so every jurisdiction is a little bit different. 10% royalties are automatically encoded on every resale. And then we're just instructed on how to pay those royalties and to who to pay them to. So if somebody's spouse, partner, has a crypto account, we can send it to the crypto account. If it's a bank account, we can off-ramp it. And, we have publicly exposed all of our records. So you can see the history of all the transactions within Pris0n Art, which is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Florida, and, use Mercury bank account and just, show everybody how the transaction is moving. And then again, those receipts are included with the piece of artwork. So I think the other thing that it does is it gives a model for complete transparency in nonprofits, which is also a big struggle that I had in managing folks at the Department of Corrections, because there were so many vendors that did not offer that transparency. And by the time you're done doling out millions of dollars of budget, you really don't have much to show for what was actually spent. So I think that in this way, we're able to resell the artwork, or the collector can resell the artwork. 10% will always go to however that's set up initially in our agreement.
Very cool. How do you go about finding which inmates to work with? Is there an application process, or how do you go about like finding these people and choosing which ones to work with?
Yeah, great question. So we're coming up on about a year of when we launched this project. We've had many conversations with many prison jurisdictions, the federal level, the state level, and even at the municipal level, like with jails. Over the course of that time, we've incorporated as a nonprofit. And one of our biggest focuses when I first started this project was like, oh, we've got to have a DAO, and we've got to have a community, and we've got to have smart contracts, and we got to have all these things, right, to make a sort of a whole project. And one of our beautiful co-founders just said to me, Abe, let's just do one thing and then let's scale it from there. So we've been really focused principally on finding the right project for a Genesis launch and just building really the best product that we can, so to speak, in terms of an offering. And so that's all public source. You can see it on our GitHub repo, and welcome you to fork the code and do something cool with it. Solve the problem.
Yeah. Have you worked with any inmates like through the entire process that you've just described yet?
Yeah, so I'm excited to announce we have our Genesis. I don't know if we want to call it a drop, but I'm going to call it a raise. We have a Genesis raise on May 12th. So official announcement, first time announcing it. And so we're really excited about that. And I think there'll be a lot of wonderful, story to surround that Genesis. We've spoken with so many inmates, some that are anonymous because they're max security facilities, and they actually have other names, that they go by now. But the beautiful thing is that they've changed their gang name, to an artist name, as an example. That process of inner transformation and conviction and the power of oneself and the ability to transform is limitless. And art has a way to communicate that in ways we can't do with language. And so a lot of these folks have really discovered this. So we've had all kinds of incredible conversations. There's so many wonderful stories, and there's so much incredible art that is created as a result of constraints. So there's not many art programs in prison today. If there are art programs in prison, they're used almost as part of a barter economy to get access to something in exchange for something. And so you see a lot of that happening. So many, few enter into these programs, many are limited. And so you see incredible things. I was sharing the other day with some folks, one artist that I've come to know well actually uses M&Ms and creates mosaics out of diligently cutting M&Ms in half and then carving the chocolate out, and then gluing those M&Ms onto a blank canvas. In some cases, it was a cell wall. So there's just so many stories, but the really incredible stories are, not about incarceration. They're about the person. Things about their childhood may have contributed to their current circumstances. Things about their parents, things about their children, things that humanize them. And that's why I feel like it's so important that these narratives are included in non-fungible tokens.
For sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the exclusive of the May 12th Genesis drop. Is there anything else you can tell us about it? Where can people, where is the drop taking place? Where can people go to, is it going to be auction style, or are you just selling them? How many pieces are there going to be? Anything else you can tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's actually our own auction site, and it's cloned off of Zora. And got wonderful co-founders, Holly Grimm, and Andy Tudhope, who are architecting and engineering this, with a lot of other wonderful people, nameless, who are testing and executing the smart contracts, make sure everything works flawlessly, which is great. And I couldn't be more proud of all of the efforts, tireless efforts. This is a project that's a gift. It's not a project where anybody is doing this for their own personal income, and so it's really beautiful to see all of the behind the scenes workings of how this comes together, especially as sort of my first Genesis crypto project. To see that happen is really astonishing. What I can tell you about the project, there's more to come, and maybe you'll have an opportunity to meet the individual whose art that we've collected. But this individual was incarcerated, wrongfully incarcerated, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to prove their innocence, has near $100,000 left in debt, had twins while she was incarcerated. The surviving twin, painted a painting at 1 year old in the visitation center on his first year birthday. And really a phenomenal story of restoration of not only a person's humanity, but of a family and their ability to continue contributing to good. And their project that they are solely focused on now is called Mothers on the Inside. And it's about providing services for pregnant women who are incarcerated so that they can have the most successful childbirth possible while incarcerated.
Wow. This might be the most beautiful podcast episode I've ever recorded.
Oh.
It takes me back to our kernel days where I think it was in one of our first modules when we were talking about gifts, right? And this is
Yes.
really like what you built it's a public good. It's a gift. It's like you're really, like your head is like 100% in like, how do I help people and how can people benefit from this and not how can I benefit from this? And I think that's super beautiful. I'm curious too, like the inmates that you've talked to and the prison systems, when you tell them about Pris0n Art, do they know what NFTs are already, or do you sort of have to do some explaining or educating?
There is some explaining and educating, but cryptography and ciphers are not lost on the incarcerated. In fact, because there's no other traditional ways of communication, cryptography is a well-known and used way to communicate amongst the populations that are incarcerated. And so a lot of that actually happens, in the libraries and with books and magazines and ciphers and letters and numbers and those kinds of things. And so cryptography is not lost on anyone who's spent any time in prison or jail. But digital concepts are sometimes difficult to understand if you haven't had, you've been incarcerated for 10, 15 years, what things look like before you were incarcerated and what they look like now are vastly different. I will say that many institutions now, penal institutions, are allowing for, third-party tablets and things like that in to try and get more education cell side, which is a good thing. Again, sad thing is that it costs a lot of money in order to be able to use them. And something else I just kind of want to point out, I've noticed that there's a lot of projects that will give money to, canteen accounts. And canteen is sort of like the 7-Eleven on the inside of the prison, right? Traditionally the most unhealthy food, but it's way better than what you're probably getting in the commissary. So it is a real benefit to have commissary funds. However, there are economies that happen. And just to share an example of a story, I knew one such individual whose mother had passed away and had gifted him the remaining funds to be deposited into his commissary account. When the rest of the population came to understand that he was holding such a large volume of money in his commissary account, he became a victim of an economic process that became really, really challenging and had to go into private custody, as a result. So there's a lot of projects that want to do good stuff, and I completely commend those projects. But like anything, sometimes we don't know the unintended consequences of our good intentions. And so that's why I just really feel so fortunate, really so fortunate to have so many wonderful people who have so much depth of knowledge about this space, whether it's on our advisory board or whether it's in the technology sphere or whether it's just in the criminal justice system. It really helps to make sure that what we're doing actually doesn't create more of a problem, but joyfully subverts the status quo and all that red tape.
Yeah, 100%. So you've clearly found a very niche use case for NFTs and a very powerful and impactful way of using NFTs. I'm wondering if there are any other use cases for NFTs that you've thought about, like, oh, this would be a really good way to use NFTs that people haven't done yet that you would love to see in the future?
Yeah, there's so much overlap with what we're doing with Pris0n Art. This gift should be cloned. It should be forked. It should be replicated, and it should be done quickly. Well, many people still don't understand what an NFT is. And what I mean by that is it's easier to just say we're going to digitally sell your artwork, not explain the blockchain, not explain crypto, but let them know that the proceeds are programmed to only do what we say they're going to do and we can prove it. Right? Rather than get into this conversation about what is cryptography, what is blockchain, what is Ethereum, what is, all of these different kinds of things, which because of its composability becomes awfully confusing really quickly. So there's so much overlap. I just came out of another kernel block where I saw a project that is providing, trauma treatment services for those that, are trying to heal themselves. And before things get worse with self-medicating on your own drugs or whatever the case is, but to build a DAO that has a provider network as an example and have a treasury that's funded by, NFT sales, and then use those funds based on the community to vote on, how those funds get used. And then people can anonymously come in and share the type of services they think they need, get paired with a provider, those kinds of things. Behavioral health services are, prison system is the largest mental health institution in the United States of America today. It's where we put all of our folks that have trauma, have cognitive impairment, from blunt head trauma, from fights, from whatever the case is. We just put them in prison, and we don't have any other place to put them. But there are treatment methods out there that really work well. It's access to those treatments that is preventing any kind of remedy. And so I think a lot of these, as we begin to think differently about what is a DAO and how do we implement sort of scalable remedies through consensus, I really feel like we have so much overlap between folks when they come out of prison, not only in mental health, but also with, transportation, with skilling up in whatever field that they want to choose to go into, stripping away the identity of being formerly incarcerated or always being a victim of one circumstance, but really unleashing great good, if you will, that exists inside oneself, to be able to really create more change, not only for yourself and become viable, in a new life, but also for all the people coming behind you that you can share your story of victory with. It's crucial. I really feel like a lot of these projects, whether it's dealing with trauma-related services and healing, whether it's dealing with hunger and poverty, whether it's dealing with homelessness, there's a lot of overlap between these projects. I would hope that somewhere in the future, a lot like traditional Web 2 project might have preferences and, a portion of your transaction is going to go to, the cause of your choosing. I would hope that we might see that in decentralized exchanges soon. I would hope that we would see that in our greatest, projects where we enjoy spending a lot of our time, games, those kinds of things, so that with every transaction, we're able to consistently build on the remedies of projects like this and others.
How do you think we can encourage more people to think about how they can use NFTs or DeFi or any other concepts in Web3 for good? Because you see so much discourse on crypto Twitter, and a lot of it is price speculation. Even the people who are building meaningful things, it's like they're building super innovative tools for us to work moving forward, but so few people are building something that is purely just for like public good, purely just a gift for a community to help them. How can we what can we do differently? What should we be doing differently to get more people to think along these lines?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's not necessarily bad that there's not some sort of social impact or environmental impact attached to your NFT, right? Like, in fact, it's been that model that's been able to give birth to projects like this, right? So all of it is important. Everyone's important and exceptional and extraordinary. So like we can't just throw anything out at the expense of another. Everything is valuable and it's contributing to, even the negative things, the things we perceive as negative are contributing to the value that we're able to create today with the right head on. But the reality is that not everybody does think that way. And I don't believe there'll ever be a technology or there will ever be a silver bullet or a golden arrow that solves this problem other than what we're doing right now. There's an ancient proverb, one is the mother of 10,000, and I really believe that dialogue, is the key. If you take a look at what makes NFTs valuable, it's the thing that ultimately makes us human. It's that layer zero. It's the story. It's the narrative. It's the thing that we get. And it's the thing that helps us build empathy and understanding. And then from there, we can move. We can have dialogues. We can talk about our differences, with common respect and a dignity for the other person's opinions. With that kind of life-to-life interaction, one by one, we'll get there. That's the only way for sustainable change in any endeavor. The reality is, though, we can make many people aware of projects like this so that they know that they can contribute and not feel hopeless in that process, or that there isn't anyone trying to joyfully subvert the status quo, that we can actually do that together in a scalable way and with everyone's consensus and participation.
I love that. Where do you see Pris0n Art being in 5 years if you had to sort of look down the line? Do you think it will grow into a DAO one day and, have a community of people who are dedicated to identifying correction centers and inmates to help? Or how do you envision Pris0n Art growing in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought. Over the past year, we haven't done much of any advertising or promotion of the project, as we've just been quietly and patiently building out, for this Genesis launch. The next stop is definitely a DAO or a community that is enabled by a DAO. And we're in conversation with some folks that have started a project called Emancipation DAO. And that might perhaps be a partner point, I don't know. But they have a beautifully mindful and thought out project there. We'll have a treasury for which we need to do things with the funds. And even though that treasury exists in a Gnosis safe and is a multi-sig and all that good stuff, it really needs to go out to the community. But I think the additional projects that are going to come out of establishing what that community looks like are going to be even more important to society at large, and especially Web3, than what we could even comprehend right now. So I see privacy concerns, I see anonymity, I see security, I see all of these things becoming interwoven into a community where we're not throwing away inclusivity with exclusivity or vice versa. In fact, in 5 years, I hope it's not called Pris0n Art. I hope it's got a name that's more like an educational institution. I think it was John Dewey that said, when you open a school, you close a prison. So I really feel like the more we can educate everyday people, the more we'll have the ability to educate and onboard many of the formerly incarcerated, even into jobs in Web3, and provide an anonymity so that their identity is not branded as, prison. It's not branded as a felon or by the actions of what they've done, but what they're yet to accomplish in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Abe, for taking the time to come on here and share about Pris0n Art with us, and also just your thoughts in general. There's so many things you said just really made me think, not just about crypto or Web3, but sort of about life. And I imagine your words had the same effect on a lot of our listeners. But last thing before you go, tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, and also where they can go to learn more about Pris0n Art and, keep up with the Genesis drop on May 12th. And if they want to support in any other way, how can they do so?
Yeah, that's great. You can find us on Twitter at Pris0n Art, and that's Pris0n Art. And or you can go to our website and see lots of information there as well. And that is Pris0n.art, Pris0n.art.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Abe. Thanks for the exclusive on your May 12th Genesis drop. We'll make sure to tweet it out as well and make sure we get as many people looking at the drop and hopefully participating in the drop as we can. Thank you so much for doing something so awesome for the world and really finding a way to use NFTs and use Web3 for good. This was super inspirational for me to listen to. I mean, this is not our first conversation about Pris0n Art, but every time we talk about it, I get more inspired by it. So just thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Diana. I really appreciate you having me on and looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to get involved in helping shape next season of the podcast, including nominating and voting on your favorite guests, go to rehash.mirror.xyz to join our crowdfund. And don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to help us get this podcast heard by as many people as possible. Thanks for being part of this community, and I can't wait to connect with many of you in Discord and Twitter soon.